Welcome back to That Rugby podcast hosted by the Sports Booths. You've got myself and Husey back again.
Hey, g'day.
Another week, super week as it should be said,
Yes,
because it was super round. A big week,
very big week.
an interesting week as well, I'd say. A couple of results went the way as expected. A couple of results didn't quite go the way as expected. All in all, some really good rugby.
Yes.
What did you make of our second ever super round, my friend?
Well, I'm going to talk about this more in my, in our best and worst things of the week, because it's some of this stuff that happened this week is worth exploring in a little bit more depth. I feel like it was an improvement on last super round. It definitely felt like there was more interest in this one. Whether that is the efforts they've put into super round itself, whether that's Eddie Jones and all the other multiplicity of factors going into rugby this year. I felt like there was more interest in Super Round this year, and I feel like the schedule was a bit better for Super Round this year as well. I think the fact that they lined up some good games and had some storylines for this one going into the games certainly helped things.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think the schedule was by far better. I think there's still ways I'd improve on it, but I would say for
Like
learning
moving it
from
out of Melbourne.
yeah, that's a good start. From learning from some mistakes, I definitely think they took stuff on board. To me, I just can't understand, and the big thing for me will always stick out why it's a 3-day event and not a 2-day event.
Yeah.
I don't mind if it's just Saturday, Sunday, 3 games on each day. If you look at Magic Round and Rugby League, and I know we're comparing, obviously, these two sports again, but Magic Round, they got to get through 8 games. Super Round, they only got to get through 6. So I assume it goes 2, 3, 3 for Super Rounds, for Magic Round. So why can't we do just 2 days of 3 games? I don't
Yeah.
really understand it.
Or even if it's not Saturday, Sunday, a Friday, Saturday, and people take a day off work or something like that. But yeah, I agree with that. Like, I feel like it's much more of a spectacle when there's 3 games on in a row. You're sitting there through 3 games. I feel like you get a bit more of your money's worth, and you're
100%.
not having to travel to the game to the stadium 3 days in a row. And you spend one less day in Melbourne, so there's that positive side of things as well.
As a Sydney sider as you are, mate, I understand that. Yeah, look, I
You know what? This is going to be big for me to say as a New South Welshman, but I'd rather spend 3 days in Queensland than 3 days in Melbourne.
wow, that's a huge
Yeah,
statement from you.
it's
Jesus.
a huge statement. Huge statement.
Um,
It's just the arrogance of people from Melbourne. You
I'm
know?
sure they say it right back to you, mate. I
Yeah,
can. uh, if we were to go into our best 3 things from the round, I went first last week. I'd like you to go first this week because
absolutely,
I think you've got some really good points to share, my friend.
absolutely. Well, I think it's the top of the list, and it's a team that's getting close to the top of the table, sitting number 3 on the ladder at the moment, but equal in wins. It's the Brumbies and getting their revenge against the Blues, and I think it's an extraordinary game for a couple of reasons. So obviously the Blues had 2 yellow cards in that game, and huge credit to the Blues for managing to score a try while 2 men down. But they did concede 2 tries to the Brumbies. So the first half of that game was all about attack, was both teams showing up. And the second half, 0 points scored. 0 points scored by both teams. Some desperate defense by the Brumbies in there, and the win sealed by Nick White, of all people. And it's a really interesting strategy from Stephen Larkham that we said to open the season, where his best halves pairing are on the bench to start the game. They're the finishers of his team. And I think that's really come with the philosophy of what we're seeing in rugby in the last couple of years of changing it from your starting side and your reserves to your starters and your finishers, elevating players to the same level and expecting everyone to be the same standard. And what highlights it better than to have 2 capped Wallabies players on the bench, your halves pairing on the bench to help close out a game, because he's seeing that as the key moments in the game that you want your veterans and level heads on the field for. So I think it's really interesting. I think it's showing the Brumbies are the best Australian team this year. They beat the Waratahs last week. So I can't even as a Waratahs fan claim anything different. And there's no shame in that either. They're a very, very good team, and they're showing that they can stack up against the New Zealand teams and the best of the New Zealand teams. This is a Blues team that went to the finals, to the grand final last year against the Crusaders, and a very, very skilled Blues team as well. But credit to the Brumbies, and then the second half defensive lockdown from both teams was extraordinary. Yeah, just a really good game of rugby. Obviously, some Blues fans are not happy about some of the refereeing decisions, but it is what it is at the end of the day.
Works both ways,
Exactly,
doesn't it?
exactly. Yeah, and I think if you'd ask a Brumbies fan, they would have rather the calls went their way last year rather than this year. Last year was what mattered.
100%.
So, but look, it's a good sign, and the fact that the Waratahs were as close to the Brumbies last week as they were gives me some transient hope, some trickle down hope as a Waratahs fan.
Definitely, you take all you can get in Super Rugby, and you'll take that.
Yeah. Now for my second big thing, a second good thing, I should say. Leading naturally on, I just talked about the Waratahs. It's a good win from the Waratahs. The Fijian Dura looked really good to start the game against the Waratahs. The fact that went into the break, tied 10 apiece, and then it was 17 all with about 20 minutes to go, definitely had myself and other New South Wales fans sweating a bit, right? Yeah. And the fact of how physical the Fijian squad was, just battering hard hitters on the Wallabies, on the Waratahs squad, who are Wallabies themselves. Lockie Swinton getting tossed about like a tissue in a laundry machine, in a washing machine, I should say. It was just incredible to see. And some good attacking rugby as well. But then the Waratahs pulled together in the closing stages of that game and ended up getting a lot of points and a bonus point as well, which is very, very necessary in this Super Rugby competition. It was good to see that things weren't totally falling apart with the loss of Angus Bell, a huge loss as that is. Nicest man in rugby, overtaking James Blackwell since he commented. He commented on our post, Luke. We've got to give him points for that.
I'm going to give James Blackwell an opportunity here. Right now, I'm going to give you an opportunity, James Blackwell. If you comment on this post, you hold the official title as the heavyweight champion of the world of the nicest guy in rugby.
100%. It's a very fair terms. Very fair terms.
And if he doesn't, then we'll award it to Angus Bell, and I'll give him the belt. I'll put the belt around in my waist.
This is it. This is the championship bout right now.
5 rounds, full niceness.
Yeah. Nicest guy in rugby, contender, challenger, Angus Bell, soon to be champion, Angus Bell. His loss, it certainly felt by myself and other Waratahs fans, but I think Tom Lambert stepped up to the plate really nicely, actually.
Definitely.
He even showed it when he came on for Bell in that game last week against the Brumbies. So he's got a pretty bright future if he can play through this season and remain healthy, Lambert, I feel like. And, obviously, our regular superstars, Max Jorgensen, shining brightly once again, Mark Nwangani Tawase looking good. And in fact, right, I actually saw for Super Round, the Melbourne Rebels Instagram was putting out some chants, right, for fans, for all 5 of their fans in the crowd to chant, But it got me thinking, well, maybe some of our other teams should have a chant as well. And it came to me. Literally, I was in the shower, scrub my hair, do my usual thing, singing some Harry Styles because he's here right now, watermelon sugar. And then it just came to, yeah, exactly. And it just came to me. I'm like, okay, I've got it. I was channeling Harry Styles. Songwriter energy came into me. I found there's actually a really good chant for the Waratahs that's just, it's only been applicable in these last couple of weeks. And it's to do with Max Jorgensen, right? It's just, he's coming to the squad. He's a great talent, and it's, I think he's earned a chant that's going to be something that will carry the Waratahs for the season, because there's nothing like a team song to build up team morale and to inspire great performances. So it goes a little bit like this, my friend. It goes, ooh, ah, Maxi J's a Waratah. Ooh, ah, not old enough to drive a car. Ooh, ah, Maxi J's a Waratah. Ooh, ah, future rugby superstar. And you just repeat that. Super easy.
Over and over. Look at that. You've got your own You'll Never Walk Alone for Liverpool. There you
exactly.
Go. It's the Max Jorgensen's never going to, not old enough to drive
He's never old enough to drive a car. Never old enough to drive a car. With that baby face, he's going to be 45 45 going on 25. So
just run us through it again. Give us
repeat. So, ooh, ah, Maxi J's a Waratah. Ooh, ah, not old enough to drive a car. Ooh, ah, Maxi J's a Waratah. Ooh, ah, future rugby superstar.
Love it. Absolutely
Easy.
Love it. Love that.
Easy.
All right,
like how...
Next Waratahs game, we're in the crowd.
Yeah. But it's PG as well, so the kids can get in on it, right? It's rhyming with Waratah, which that's not easy to do. Like that's a funnily named plan anyway. And it's one of the rising talents of the game that everyone can get behind. Good kid.
That'll be up there with the old Waisaki Naholo chant. You heard that one?
Yeah.
You know that one.
Remind me of it.
I
sang it's your turn now.
Waisaki Naholo. And obviously
over and over. Yeah.
Over and over again. So it could rival it if you get enough Waratahs there. Yeah. We'll turn it into a mini album, and all of a sudden you'll be leading the chants at Ali.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Me and Chazza, me and Charlie again, leading the chance. Yeah.
All right. What's your last point, my friend?
Last point is that Super Round was aptly named this year for some super games, right? Two particularly stick out to me. We already talked about the Blues and the Brumbies, but the other one that's obviously generating a lot of headlines is the Rebels and the Hurricanes. And your boy, Artie Savia, we won't talk about it too much now because I understand we've got that coming up later in the program. But that was another close one. But outside of that, I don't. Maybe you could tell me this, but this feels to me like it's got to be the highest scoring round in Super Rugby history.
It was. I did the stat. 68-ish, just over 68 points per game, which last time I was giving the compliment to 61 points, and I wasn't even.
I know.
What was I thinking?
That's an extra try. It's an extra try.
Yeah.
So there's positives and negatives to that, and so the positives is obviously there's some entertainment value in there for some of the games that are high scoring and close. Like the Rebels and the Hurricanes, even Chiefs Moana Pacifica, right? The way the Moana Pacifica sort of rallied back there and made it a little bit entertaining. The Waratahs and the Dura, that was pretty good there as well. But I might talk about my worst thing now because it directly links to this point. And in fact, so it sort of makes Super Round a bit of a neutral point for me because the blowouts, right? The Reds and the Force, Chiefs and Moana Pacifica, Crusaders and Highlanders, right? It's never nice to see blowouts in these games. However, one thing that, again, this is also a mixed thing, right? Because the blowouts, neither of the biggest blowouts were on the Dura or Moana Pacifica. The biggest blowouts were on the Force, an Aussie team, and the Highlanders, a Kiwi team, right? Which there's positive and negatives to that, but it's like, okay, great, we've got these two Pacific teams in, and they're not just getting railed every game, right? There's equal opportunity in teams getting pounded into the dust, but we don't want to see teams getting pounded into the dust. We never want to see a 71-20 scoreline unless you're a Queenslander. You never want to be seeing that kind of a scoreline, right? You want to be seeing great games. The Waratahs Dura game, I think, is a great example of where you can get a blowout, but it doesn't feel like the whole game was a blowout. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like where that was close, and then it just opened up towards the end. And you, as a Fijian fan, you can feel like, look, we were right in there, and then just a couple of things, and the game slipped away from us. Even the Moana Pacifica one, they started to come back and they're like, okay, we could sort of take some positive signs out of this. I don't know if you're a Force fan or a Highlanders fan, what you take out of those games, other than burn the game tape.
It's got a real feeling of when the NRL changed their rules to speed the game up. Was it not 2 years ago? I think it was. Yeah. And you're getting those blowouts where it's not a blowout because the teams are so far apart. It's that momentum shift. And when you get the momentum and run with it like the Reds did, it's very hard to stop. And I feel like we're in that place at the moment where you can see the momentum of a game can just turn like that. And if you get it going and it starts tumbling, it's really hard to stop at the moment.
Yeah.
Which I'm not too against. I would rather this and stick with the same old fad. I think I saw enough from that Blues Brumbies game. I think that sets the standard where you can have 45 points in one half, but you show enough defense, you can have 0 points in another half. So as much as you don't want to see a 71-20 blowout, if we see a couple more of them, I'll be starting to ask questions. But there was once upon a time, I think the Crusaders put 100 on you guys. So it's not too disappointing. If there was, say, 5-6 of them in the season, I'll probably look back. But early in the season, sometimes those things happen. But I understand you're a negative. You don't want teams being blown out. Yeah, I would have hated to see the Hurricanes lose in that fashion if they would. But to go on to my points now, I've got two main points down and then a third one, which I'll touch on quickly. The first one is the fatigue. Now, I I don't say this like I enjoy seeing the fatigue, but to come back to what was the game of the round, and I think the game of the season so far, the Blues versus the Brumbies, the last 10 minutes of that game was legitimately not who wanted it more, but who would survive the longest. You had RTS, Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, who, a leaguey, has been through all that.
Dalian medalist,
best in the game one season.
Yeah.
Have to limp off in the 77th, 78th minute. You had players just down galore. It is a war of attrition because players just, in this new rules, you can just tell. So this is, it finally feels like rugby's at that point where when they brought out the water breaks, it's like, this is why the water breaks are here. Because you want players to be able to go there for 80 minutes. Like, you don't want Roger coming off, but you also want to physically test them as much as you can. And you could just see with that game, it was testing every single player out there to their fullest, to their full capacity. Even, two players get a head knock and then two starters have to come back on. It was a test that delivered. So that was one really good point, and I feel like that's where all games are going, especially close contests. I think that's why you got such intensity, which is my second point, in that Hurricanes versus the Rebels game, because it's a war of attrition and players are going to go and do whatever they can to get the win to a point. And so you're going to have a high level of intensity where you get players and teams squaring up. Like there was bad blood. And again, most of it started by Dane Coles because he's a pest. But it was a level of intensity above in a couple of those games. Even that, as I touched on again, the Blues Brumbies, I looked back and I was like, that was just about a test level intensity, the end of that game, where you were just like, oh, anyone could take it. So those were two really key points I learned from second round. We're going to have a battle of attrition in some games where, again, the Rebels seemed out of it and then they got that momentum, and once they started to roll, if you can get that momentum turning, you're going to have a team, I honestly believe, will go up by 40 points at halftime and lose the game. Just the way momentum's rolling this season and the intensity of the games. My last one,
a bit in the Pacifica game as well, just...
They started to get on a roll when you were like, could this actually, again, they ran out of time. I feel like, again, they ran out of time rather than they actually lost that game in the end.
And one thing I'm going to put this as a second worst thing, but it's not even just about this round. It's about Super Rugby, I guess, in general at the moment. When you Google match results for a lot of sports, you'll get the match results. You get it for Super Rugby as well. However, you will often get a breakdown of when someone scored a goal and things like that. There's nothing like that for Super Rugby. It's just the scores. I'd like Super Rugby, get onto Google, get them to put more detailed breakdowns in there, and we could see, so you look at a 52 to 29 score, Chiefs won in Pacifica. Oh, okay, the Chiefs were blowing them out the whole game. However, you get a little bit more detail of just simply who scored the tries when, it becomes a lot more interesting to look at and see, oh, okay, Moana Pacifica actually rallied in there. Even the Super Rugby website itself is not the easiest to follow on about who scored when. I'm looking at it right now, and I'm looking at it's a massive green and red triangles, and it's like, well, which team is on which side, and it's not easy to read, right? This is how you get people into sports: is ease of access, ease of information, right? So Super Rugby, elevate your game. You're starting out well. You've made some good steps, but there's more work to be done.
Definitely. And I again, it should be. The easier it is, the better it is. The simpler it is, the easier it is, I guess. But yes, my worst thing for the round was Super Round. Now, I'm not saying that because I thought the round was bad. I'm saying that because, again, a lack of crowds disappoints. I feel like you hold that in Allianz. I feel like you hold that Eden Park, Forsyth Bar, even Westpac, Suncorp. You're getting a decent turnout. So 2 years there, I think that was a 2-year deal to start off with. So it wouldn't surprise me if they move it to another venue. It just makes sense. I think Sydney makes the most sense since the AFL's having their, I think it's called Gather Round, which is just the weirdest cool thing I've ever heard in my life. But that's AFL for you, and Victorians, as we've already stated on the show, are strange. So with them having that, with Queensland having the Magic Round, it just seems right that Sydney get this game. It's a bit weird as well. Like we had the test last year, the All Blacks versus the Wallabies in Melbourne, and now we've got the MCG test this year. Sydney seems to be just missing a little bit of touch of those big rugby events, unfortunately.
They've put a lot of eggs in the NRL basket.
They have. All right, so those are our best and worst things from the round. Let's move on to our key points from Super Rugby round 2. Now, the Highlanders is the first one I've got on my list. Now, the Highlanders have now conceded over 110 points, struggled to score points themselves. I think they've scored about 30-odd. Played, obviously, two of the two finalists from last year. Doesn't get any easier as they face now at the top of the table Chiefs. Who have scored 30 on the Crusaders, and then scored 50 against Moana. Another blowout here, and you'll be, I guess, signalling the alarms for the Highlanders. Like, we both picked them to miss out on the top 8, and this is the reason why. I don't think that on their day they can't beat a team, and I definitely think you'd expect to see a better effort against the Chiefs, but I don't know, when do you stop using excuses and just go, they're a bad team? And then my issue becomes, if they are a bad team, what happens with the All Blacks in a bad team? Because not often and not in a long time have we had like a really bad Super Rugby team. Like the Highlanders of last year, we could say were pretty bad. Like they lost a fair, didn't win, lost more games than they won. And I look at the All Blacks in there, I look at some, like even the Groot, I look at Aaron Smith as the two main ones, and he goes, when you're learning to play in a losing culture, that must hurt. And that's not against those players. I'm not sitting there saying Aaron Smith's going into the Highlanders locker room going, oh, we're going to lose again and going to take that to the All Blacks. But it is just a little switch on me that goes, if you're an All Black right now in the Highlanders setup, is it time to switch your focus? Like if I'm Aaron Smith, this is my last year for the Highlanders, am I starting to think, okay, I know I'm going to be at a World Cup later, let's give this 3 or 4 more weeks, and then I'll just move into a mentor role where I just stay fit for the All Blacks because we're clearly not good enough to make the finals?
It depends. I think you need to be consulting with All Blacks coaching staff because that can be seen as a very bad sort of culture move or like personality move. Thinking you're above the team. I think if I was coaching, I'd rather see a player still giving their all no matter what the circumstances are, because that's the kind of player I'd want to have in my national squad. It's tough though, because even then that might not be enough, right? You might be thinking, look, yes, these guys are still giving their all, but it's not good enough to shift the mark for this team, and this is a New Zealand Super Rugby team. Why would I bring them into the All Blacks? There are players clamoring for spots in the All Blacks that why not give them a shot? It's tough, but I think for me, I'd rather see players giving it their all, and I don't know. It is a hard one, and I feel for those All Blacks in the Highlander squad. But look, for me, the dates they've got to have circled week 4 and 5, the Western Force and the Fijian Dura. Right, so the Western Force, they won their first game against the Rebels barely, and then they've just been blown out by the Reds. Yeah. Right, so they're an inconsistent team. They're not a terrible team. They're inconsistent, right? So that's a team you should be looking to pounce on and take advantage of and say, okay, we've had a rough first 2, maybe 3 weeks. We can bounce back though and show that it's more the quality of our opponent than it is about us. And then week 5, the Fijian Dura, again, similar thing. Won round 1 barely, fought hard at round 2, but still weren't enough to do it. The Dura will have that game circled as well. You mark my words, right? So this week, Dura going up against the Crusaders, likely going to lose that one. They're going up against the Reds. Maybe they might win that one, but the Reds came out very strongly last week. However, the Highlanders, that's the game that Dura are like, okay, we need to start proving that us and Moana Pacifica, but more specifically us, are not bottom 2 of the table, right? And the perfect team to start with on our schedule is the Highlanders. They're the first of those teams of really I have 3 circles, right? That are vulnerable to Fiji and Dura that aren't Moana Pacifica, and that's the Highlanders, the Rebels, and the Force, right? And so they're going to have that circle on their calendar and say, okay, this is where we could start our campaign and prove that we're not the 11th team anymore. The next week they've got the Rebels, so that's another really good opportunity for them to prove it. So I think the Dura are going to come out firing in that game, and I think if the Highlanders lose either of those 2 games, that's when some serious questions are going to be starting to be asked in Dunedin.
Yeah, and I wouldn't count the Dura out quite yet against the Crusaders because it is in Fiji, the game. And so that adds another level to it. We saw how deafening the crowd was when they played the Chiefs and I believe the Highlanders there last year. So I imagine they'll be the same again.
We know the impact of a big crowd on the Crusaders when the Waratahs played them at Leichhardt.
Exactly, a big hostile crowd that definitely gets people going, and teams struggle with it. So, yeah, look, I tend to agree. The Highlanders, after these first 3 rounds, if they don't pick up some serious points, we'll be in a world of trouble, I think, because it won't get any easier after that. They'll be facing an uphill battle, and there may be some alarm sirens blasting. So, another team that doesn't have to worry about it on the other end of the spectrum are the Brumbies, who now go 2 from 2 against 2 pretty damn good opposition. And the reason they're above the Hurricanes in my power rankings that just went out today was the 2 opposition that they've played. The Brumbies have beaten a blue side who, for all money's worth in week 1, looked like the team to beat. So then, believe it or not, the Brumbies obviously then now look like the team to beat, and then bet the Waratahs in round 1, who are definitely no slouches. So I kind of went, you know what, this Brumbies team, through both of us ranking them 6, have come out, and I wouldn't say proven us wrong, but they definitely have put more doubts in my head that then, like I thought the Waratahs were for sure going to be the best team in Australian rugby, just with the coaching changes and everything. But Larkham and everyone in that organisation has proved us wrong so far.
Yeah, they've done a really, really good job, the Brumbies, sort of picking up from last year. And in our pre-game chat we had with a lot of the fans, that was the question I asked was, why do you think the Brumbies are being so discounted this year? And I think it's just because they haven't really made many headlines, right? Whereas the Waratahs obviously sort of had as much as you can in Super Rugby. And, the new young talent, Max Jorgensen, Coleman, another year under him, Michael Hooper, he had the Kurtley Beale off-season incidents and things like that. Swinton coming back to play, Angus Bell coming back, all these things. And the Brumbies just kept on trucking, kept on going from last year. Obviously lost some key pieces, but still are looking just as deadly.
100%, yeah. Couldn't agree more. They're flowing under.
One thing I will say about the Brumbies, though, is that I think Tom Banks is doing everything he can do to play himself out of a Wallabies jersey. Like, he's played it's so many of the same silly mistakes. I remember the one instance sticks out of my mind against the Blues where he gets the ball and it's a clear occasion where he should just kick the ball forward.
Tom Banks or Tom Wright, sorry.
Tom Wright. That's the one. I get them confused. Tom Wright, sorry.
Yeah.
Tom Wright. Yeah, doing everything he can.
Tom Banks catching shots and he's over in Japan.
Yeah, wrong Tom. I get them confused because they're so not good enough to be Wallabies. Sorry, that's pretty harsh, but I mean, I think there's going to be better options coming through. Yeah, Tom Wright, where he just carried the ball. He was a clear opportunity to kick the ball, and where he really should have done it inside his own 22, instead carries it out, gets caught in a crowd of Blues with no one around him, penalty, and then the Blues, I believe that's what tied the Blues up at 20 all put them 20-13, and then they scored a try and level it up 20 all. Like, just bad decision making there, and it's so frustrating because he's got such good moments where he could be such a good player, but I think his decision making is just not there. And I think he's doing everything he can to fall out of favor with Eddie Jones, who came out during the week and said that players he was looking at were Max Jorgensen and Ben Donaldson from the Waratahs as feature backs.
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. I didn't watch enough of that game. I only saw the last 15 minutes to make a judgment call on Tom Wright. He looked, again, he's a league background, so attacking flair is always going to be there. I think he's definitely best suited to a wing position, fullback position. But I mean, the Brumbies are still 2-0 and doing the job for now. Another team, just quickly wanted to mention the Crusaders bouncing back in a big way. I know it's only the Highlanders, we mentioned them, but I mean, I wouldn't want to be facing the Crusaders after they've just had a loss. That's one thing I think we've all learnt from our time watching the Crusaders play. But again, just a quick bounce back. And then the team who deserves at least some praise from me after I wrote them off and said they're going to come in 11th to put 71 points on the Force. That hurt a lot for me to see, just because of perspective of what I've picked and what I've said and the belief I had that the Reds weren't going to do much this season. They shut me up real quick with that.
Mm-hmm.
Shall we move
shout
on
out
to the biggest talking point of the round, though?
Yes.
Adi Savia, Simbins, wrongfully so. What, there was something that happened after he got Simbined? I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Look, rugby's bad boy, Adi Savia, infamous bad boy and
like bad.
Poor personality. Yeah. That's why you invited me to be on the podcast. Adi Savia, I guess for anyone that didn't know and didn't pick up on my gesture before, made a threatening gesture at a Melbourne Rebels player. You see reactions all across the spectrum of, from the point of, the usual outrage of disgusting, obscene, what's happening to our game kind of thing, as if this shit didn't happen all the time. Or, you listen to old people talk about rugby and rugby league, right? You think that back in the day, everyone was just shaking hands after every play. Everyone was super polite and, was best as the buddies. And there wasn't anything like a Tommy Raudonikis yelling cattle dog to get people to punch each other and things like that. Like, it was just a gentleman's game, and it's just the modern players, it's just the youths of today are just so just blah blah blah, as if they were all totally innocent. And then you have the other side of things where it was just like, toughen up, sunshine. It was a gesture. Who the fuck cares? For me, I sort of land somewhere in the middle. It's not, I think, about the impact on the field. I think if you saw this at a grassroots rugby game, not much would be made of it. But I think because the fact that it is televised, it's Super Rugby where you're trying to get lots of families coming in and things like that as well, that you just can't have that on the field, because, kids pick up on what they see their idols do. It's why we see like Instagrams and TikToks of kids playing basketball and doing their like favorite basketball NBA players like moves and things like that. And it's like, you're 6 years old. What the hell are you doing? Like, and it's so disrespectful to their opponents and things like that. And it's more important to teach kids to, to be that ideal that the old people say that the game used to be, right? Because the game didn't used to be that, but that's what we want the game to be, and that's what we should be teaching the young people to be doing, is to be respectful of your opponent. At the end of the day, it is just a game, and the other person is competing and trying just as hard as you are, and so you should give them respect for that. So those kind of threatening gestures, I don't think has a place in professional sports. I think if you're going to do anything like that, the grabbing of the jersey is enough. And if you're going to throw a punch, throw a punch. But we don't need, throat slitting gestures. Ever in the NBA, a player's just been taken time away from the team / suspended for flashing a gun on an Instagram video and things like that. It's like, we don't need that stuff in the professional sports. Everyone recognizes you're a tough guy, right? You're playing rugby union at the highest level on the best teams, right? Everyone knows you're a hard man. Don't need to prove it by doing gestures and other silly shit like that. Like, I do have to admit, I lost a bit of respect for him for doing that. I would have rather he just thrown a punch. I would have more respect for him for just throwing a punch.
I can do that. Your opinion totally, and I understand that. I'm actually happy he didn't throw a punch and this was it, because if he throws a punch, it really gets taken. Like, especially union, like in league or state of O, is about the only time where someone, like in league, you can throw a punch because the biff used to be all serious. Like, if he threw a punch, I think that would have really kicked on and kicked something off. I think I tend to agree with you, like where I sit in the middle. Again, I think he apologised straight away afterwards.
Yeah.
there shouldn't be anything more on it. I think it was a bad look. However, we're asking grown-ass men 100 kilos plus to tackle each other, smash each other for 80 minutes. If you say something, and again, we weren't in the middle of all that, so let's say, again, I imagine being the classy player that Ardie Savea is, he won't come out and say that someone told him to go get effed or, said something about his family or something like that. And again, I'm not saying a Rebels player did that as well. I want to make that clear. We just don't know the full story, what actually happened in the middle there, and we'll never know the full story. And I think he got carried away with what was happening. You're asking guys to, again, compete at the highest level in a contact sport. You're going to get reactions like this. I am happy that he apologised. Like, I am glad that he understood what he did. Like, again, there's a point to it. And, we ask players to be characters because we love characters in our sport. And a good example is Latrell, who kicked a conversion against the Sharks and then gave the crowd a little bit of a G up, nothing too much. Again, as far as I can see it, concerned it, entertaining as hell. And all the comments on the Instagram or Facebook page or whoever it was that posted it was bashing him like, oh, why does he do this? He just winds him up and then cries wolf. It's like, we want our players to have a bit of character. Again, I think this one oversteps that line, and I think Ardie's the first to admit that it did. But I don't mind it if we get a bit more characters kind of coming out and we get that tense rivalry. Like, I think that Melbourne versus the Hurricanes now like after that game, it felt like there was some rivalry there, which, you don't often get when you're playing those Super Rugby teams. So, again, you don't want it, but you do want, I could only imagine, the headline. Let's say the Hurricanes finish first, the Rebels finish 8th in the playoff in the quarterfinals, and it's the last time they faced off, it got overheated, and you just see the Fritz slip. It's great TV, but it's not for what we want from the game. Like you said, I think you put it really well. It's not what we expect from the game, what we want from the game. But again, to me,
for me, the issue is that it takes it off the field, right? When I say I'd rather you throw a punch and then it's on the field, right? You've hit someone on the field. Yes, you'll get the discipline and things like that, and there'll be things, but that's to you to play individually. When you do it just to threaten to kill someone, that is like threatening something off the field, right? That's where it implies there's violence off the field going to happen, where it goes beyond just I'm competing against you and I don't like you while I'm on this field with you. Where if you have a bit of a biff up on field at the end of the game, you can just get over it. As long as it's not like a coward punch or something where you run in from the side and just bash them. If you're there yelling in someone's face and you throw a punch, you're two men heated at each other, there's probably violence coming. At least the other person can sense it. If it's a coward punch, no, that's terrible. But when you're doing something, you threaten someone like that, it's like you're threatening them off the field. That's where I take more of an issue with it, where it's implying that this violence, this aggressiveness you feel towards the other person is going to continue off the field, and that they should be worried about that. As absurd as that sounds, that is sort of that. Then I'm talking because, as I said, this transitions through to the lower levels, right? And we have seen in league, which something we don't want to emulate, is in the lower grades, in the junior grades, where people's families end up getting involved and fighting on the field. We've had murders at rugby league games and things like that. And that's not something we want to transition through. So I'm not implying that Ardie Savea would attack a Melbourne Rebels player off the field. But I'm saying that influence that it has on the lower levels and the junior grades, that's where, and this is why it's good he apologized and explained why it's wrong, because we don't want to see that carrying through the lower levels, because people are easily influenced by their superstars.
Yeah, I guess, and I've got two questions, and this will be interesting, just a little topic to talk about. If he says the words, I'm going to kill you, do you think it's worse or better or the same?
I think it's, and this is going to sound like maybe a bit of a cop-out, but it depends on if the cameras pick it up or not. Oh, sorry, if the microphones pick it up or not, because you can argue some ambiguity there, maybe, whereas there's nothing ambiguous about this, and every camera is going to see this, right? It's clear, no one can misinterpret it or whatever, and it goes beyond language, right?
Well, okay, so say it's caught on camera, or caught on the ref's mic that Ardie Savea said, "I'm gonna fucking kill you when I get back on."
Yeah, I actually think it's better, because that can be interpreted as like he's going to hit him really hard in a tackle or something like
So
that.
what I'm going to argue to the point here is we didn't know what Ardie Savea's interpretation is. So a lot of people, again, us included, will interpret it like I'm going to kill you. But in my interpretation from a rugby player, I know all he's doing is telling me he's going to try and kill me on the rugby field. But I can get your point of view as well.
It's different though. It's different. The gesture clearly implies murder, like slitting someone's throat. It literally is slitting throat.
So the words, if I say the words, I will kill you.
No, not necessarily. That's the thing, right? Because the words are more open to interpretation than the gesture is.
Okay,
that's
cool.
the thing.
Which is all right. That's all right. Second question. Now, this one is more of interest to me, and again, it's a touchy subject. If the player was white, do you think there's a different reaction to it? And I'm not saying different reaction to us, because I think our reactions would be the same. I honestly do. Because he's got a Māori Pacifica background, and this is part of their, again, culture, like a haka once upon a time did end with that. Do you think that has taken effect on it? Because in my own belief, I think it has. I think if a white player does this, he gets the hitter. It depends what happens. I think he gets the same stuff kind of thrown at him. It's not a good look. It's not this. It's not that. I don't think the media comes down as hard as they've come down on Ardie Savea. Just for your opinion, though.
Look, I'm honestly, because I don't know that much about, I guess, how Pacifica people are viewed in New Zealand. But let's if we transition the example to, like, say, if an Aboriginal player did it and it was being viewed by the Australian media, because this is being more heavily scrutinized by the New Zealand media than the Australian media for obvious reasons. Let's say it was a Pacifica player in Australia or an Indigenous Australian player here in Australia, as compared to like an Anglo-Saxon player. Yes, I think the reaction is different. And so for that reason, I would say probably yes, the reaction is different from Ardie Savea if things are similar in New Zealand compared to how they are here in Australia. And it might only be subtle. I feel like it might only be subtle because from what I've seen of a lot of the news things, and this is just from what I've seen, it might be different from what you've seen. It's not been like as massive as, say, Latrell did it in rugby league, right? I think rugby league players' behaviour is under a bit more of a microscope than rugby union, but I still think there might be some element to that. I don't know how much because I don't know that much about, I guess, like racial relations in New Zealand.
Yeah.
But I think you'd be silly to say that it hasn't played into it.
Yeah, interesting, and I think that's a good opinion as well. I don't think our opinions would change. Again, we can't guarantee that, but I would hope so at least. But it was just something that ticked in my head. I was like, I reckon if this was a Dane Coles type thing, it would have been played off slightly differently than it's playing off at the moment, which is really interesting. But like you said, I mean, I read an article in the Sydney Morning Herald that was talking about how the Waratahs will be watching how Ardie Savea's citation goes because they play him in 2 weeks. They're not worried about the outcome for him. If it's as a bad thing for the sport, it's more, will he be playing in 2 weeks? And will we have to face him? So, I mean, lots of mixed messages. I think in the end, you sit on the middle. You're not, like, I don't think this is the most disgusting act you'll ever see on a rugby field. No. I don't think this is what should be on the rugby field as well, if we put it that way. We'll move on from that, though. It's an interesting point, and I just, when these incidents like this come up, I think it's a time for discussion rather than, I guess, finger pointing and stuff like that. So I do love discussing.
It is very much like a moment of, like, look, Ardie, you fucked up. It's not what you see in the game. Slap on the wrist, move on. It's not as if, like, it's not as if he's done something truly terrible. It's not like he's done a John Hopewade. We'll put it that way.
He hasn't gone that far. Marcus Smith obviously was dropped from the English side, then put on a man of the match performance for his Harlequins side before you announced to me today that he's back into the English squad.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's a turnaround, and this is what's great about English rugby, at least, and I'll be interested to see how much communication Borthwick had with him about getting dropped, going down and playing a hell of a performance. it's a realization, and this is what I love about rugby, that the highest level of the game is international rugby, and there isn't no doubt about it. You can have players who absolutely tear up in Super Rugby, or a solid Super Rugby players that just can't make the step up. Rob Simmons, to name one example. Stephen Donald for another, as an All Black example, who, were careers out of being Super Rugby players, but never making that step up to international. I'm not saying that's happening with Marcus Smith, but I love when you see situations like this, and it shows that, hey, there is a massive step up. You can put a Marcus Smith into the Premiership and he'll work wonders, but to be an English rugby player, you've got to be up a whole nother level.
Yes, 100%. And yeah, it's good when I like when players respond like that.
100%. Last point, New Zealand rugby coaching decision. Now, I just wanted to bring this out purely because I've got an interested stake in it because it's the All Blacks, but also you've recently gone for a coaching change, and I kind of wanted to compare the coaching changes or the lack of coaching changes. So Ian Foster's come out and said he's not going to stick around or reapply after the World Cup, which I think is a fantastic way to do it. However, now we know a new All Blacks coach is coming. The two that have been tipped over Jamie Joseph or Razor, Scott Robinson, the All Blacks committee have said it's going to take 6 weeks, about 2 weeks ago, to make their decision. Razor was dropping hints like it was no end in the New Zealand media. All this is dragging out yet again, like New Zealand Rugby did with Ian Foster last year. What had me thinking was the differences we have in our two situations right now. So obviously, Wallabies were like that. Snap, decision made, boom, done. We're doing what we think's best. New Zealand Rugby have to go for a fucking committee of 8 people to do any decision made, and ever, it seems like. Hearing that, what are your thoughts on that coaching situation first, and then I'll kind of give my explanation of who I want the coach to be and why.
Yeah, I guess it's a luxury for New Zealand rugby. You've got, for Australian rugby, I think there was a snap decision that was forced by circumstance. I'm sure they wished it could have been handled differently, and it means they're going to have to wear the responsibility of the outcome, particularly this World Cup, on their shoulders more heavily than if they'd been able to go through a committee-like process, which is odd to say because arguably if you go through that committee-like process and things like that, you've done more due diligence. I always struggle saying it. Due diligence. And so you should face more consequences because you'd be more certain in your decision because you spent all this time and energy, investing in your options. But because they've made that snap decision, they're going to wear that more heavily. Whereas I think because New Zealand rugby is taking their time a bit, they will bear the perception is they'll bear less responsibility in it, which is really weird. It's a paradox, really. I guess for me, like looking at it, I think New Zealand rugby is doing the right thing. Is taking their time and being certain of their next move because I think they face such criticism for the Ian Foster simply because he hasn't won every single game he's coached, right? He still had a pretty solid international record, and he's had some stumbling blocks against some tough opponents, right? But it's just not the level of invincibility that All Black supporters have had the luxury of experiencing the last few years. So I think they want to try and find a coach who will bring back that invincibility. Now, I don't know if they will do that because I think international rugby isn't going to allow them to do that anymore. But why wouldn't you spend the appropriate amount of time doing it? If you've got the time, if you're not feeling like you have to do this covertly behind Ian Foster's back, if the candidates know who they are and the public knows who they are, right, you can be pretty open air about all of it and above board about your process. And at the end of the day, anytime you make a decision at these levels with these high stakes, you're going to get criticized. You're never going to have a solution that makes everybody perfectly happy. So, I think they're doing their best they can to find the right candidate for the position. So, I guess there is frustration from a fan's perspective because it is taking so long, and I understand that. But but I'm sure each fan has got their own perfectly clear idea of who should be the next coach, and why can't New Zealand Rugby just see that it should be this person so clearly, but when you're the person actually making the decision, you want to make sure you're making the right decision,
Yeah,
or at least
fair
the best decision possible.
I guess I feel like it shouldn't take 6 weeks to make this decision is the only thing that, to me, blares out. Like, let's say you have them for 3 interviews. You can do that within 3 weeks and go away and probably make a decision from there. It shouldn't be that hard to decide. Now, it depends who they're interviewing and everything. If it is a battle between those two that I mentioned earlier, Jamie Joseph and Razor, that'll be a hell of a battle because Jamie Joseph has got some extraordinary results from his time coaching. He's probably the only man that could stand up to Razor and have a shot. So I imagine it's something like that is the only way. Maybe, let's say, Ronan O'Gara put his hat in there just because I know he's done some work with the Crusaders before, something like that out of the blue, but I don't see it not being Scott Robinson. So my belief is they've just taken 6 weeks to make sure he's 100% the right man for this job. But yeah, I can't see it not being Scott Robinson in all of my belief, which I think will be a good step for the All Blacks. It's the direction I believe they need to head in, and I'm just glad we've been able to hold on to him. So yeah, interesting times ahead. Let's wrap this up. Next week, obviously, Six Nations is back, so we'll see England and France battle, in which will really define my French hatred if I can fully go in on the French, if I absolutely drop the mic and go crazy at all the Frenchmen. If you do not beat the English in Twickenham, I'll let you know about it. Scotland host Ireland, which will pretty much, I think, define whether Ireland get a Grand Slam in Scotland. Because if they beat Scotland, I think they will go ahead and do it. Super Rugby game of the round looks to be the Hurricanes and the Blues, but you also have the Brumbies against a rejuvenated Reds, who obviously put 70 points on last week. So lots of exciting footy to go. Make sure you subscribe and follow everything on our YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. You'll find us all over the place there. Clips of the podcasts and other videos we do. However, for now, we will see you later. Goodbye.
Peace.